Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. Welcome back to the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm your host, Jamison Cable, and we have a great Kentucky history episode today. We have with us today Doug Cantrell, and he's going to be talking to us about Martin Himler. Switching over from Himlerville, let's talk a little bit about Himler himself, and his story.
Well, he's a unique person. His family found his autobiography and donated to the Martin Historical Society. Well, they contacted Kathy Corbin from Moorhead, who Kathy had read an article I'd written about Himlerville in the 1990s, and she contacted me about helping get the book published. Yeah. And so we edited the book and sent it to the University of Kentucky, and they turned it down. So we sent it to the University of Tennessee, and they published it. I don't know why UK would turn it down. We would hope they would take it, but they didn't.
Yeah.
And it came out in 2018. It's still in print. And if anybody wants a copy, if you can get it, it's on Amazon, or the Martin County Historical Society has a copy of it, or has it for sale. And University of Tennessee does. And all proceeds go to all profits that Kathy and I make on the book, we donate to the Historical Society to restore the house. Mm-hmm. But they found his autobiography, and we know a lot more about him because of that. And so he was born in 1888 in a little town of Hungary. He was very young, and his family moved to Matrabelli, where his father was, who was an Orthodox Jew, was going to operate a saloon. And Himler grew up there. Well, he went to, I guess we'd say, elementary school and high school, but he wasn't a very good student. He got kicked out of high school. He went to a Jewish school, but he got kicked out. But oddly enough, the year that he was kicked out, he won the award for the top student in literature in the school.
Oh, wow.
And they presented the award, and then he said they kicked him out the same day. He wasn't in school. He played hooky a lot. He was Eastern Kentucky. And his interesting story, he fell in love. He was Jewish. He fell in love with a young Gentile woman. Her family was wealthy. Himmler's family was not. Himmler may have been lower middle class. They weren't farmers, but they, were saloon keepers. But and he was maybe 16 or 17 at the time, and his family, the girl's family, broke the relationship off because Himler was poor and because he was Jewish, and that broke his heart. And Himler then, after he was kicked out of school, got a job. I'm not quite sure. It was he called himself a clerk. He was probably an assistant or a secretary to somebody who owned a factory. Well, one of the workers or assistants at the factory, or vice president or something, decided he was going to open his own company, and he persuaded Himler to go with him. And so Himler worked for that guy for a year or so after high school as his clerk or secretary, or I'm not quite sure what the relationship was. He says he was a clerk. And Himler quit that job because he was upset when the guy didn't give him a raise after the first year. And because that, Himler couldn't find another job in Hungary. And he a year or so, he tried to find a job. He decided then he was going to come to the United States. He'd heard that things were better here. And so everybody in his family, with the exception of his mother, opposed him going to the U.S. But he went anyway. And he arrived when he was 18 years old. He worked his way as a waiter across the ocean on a steamship, the the SS Carpathia. If you're familiar with that, that was the steamship that rescued the survivors of the Titanic.
Oh, wow. Huh?
But he
Wow.
worked on that ship across that ship he came across on. And
Oh.
he thought he was a kind-hearted person. There was a poor family on there, and Himmler had a little bit of money that he'd saved up for his trip. But he thought he was going to get paid pretty good when the journey ended, because he was a waiter and the ship captain was supposed to pay him. He gave all of his money he brought to this poor family who had nothing. And then when Himmler got to the U.S., he found that he wasn't going to get any money from the ship captain because he broke some dishes, and the ship captain withheld almost all his wages because he broke some dishes. And so Himmler arrived in the U.S. with less than $1 in his pocket.
Oh, geez.
And he had a cousin who was supposed to meet him and give him a place to stay. Well, his cousin didn't meet him. So Himmler came ashore in the U.S. and he is no cousin. And he later found out that his cousin didn't meet him because he had lied about how successful he was. And he didn't want Himmler to actually know until the family back home that he wasn't successful like he said he was. And so Himmler was by himself. So he had to find a job because he was broke. He didn't get any wages what he was thinking he was going to get, so he was broke. So he went into a saloon not because he wanted to drink, because he didn't really like drinking himself. But he heard that you could get free lunch if you bought a beer, for the price of a beer. And he was hungry, so he went to that saloon to get lunch for buying a beer. And while he was eating there, some recruiter for a coal mine owner came in looking for people for work a coal mine in West Virginia. Well, Himmler needed a job, and so he took the guy up. They promised him free transportation to the little town called Thacker, West Virginia. And so he was put on a train and sent to Thacker, West Virginia, but it turned out the coal operator lied to him because he told him the transportation would be free. Well, when Himmler got there, he found out it'd be about 3 months before he would get any money, wages, because they were going to withhold transportation, they were withhold lodging, they were withhold food, going to withhold mining clothes, mining equipment, picks, shovels, that sort of thing, and a mining hat and lanyard he had to buy. And so Himmler and several of his friends who went to West Virginia with him and come across on the same ship, they decided after 3 or 4 days they were going to leave, and so they snuck off.
Wow.
And went into Ohio and worked at several jobs there. He worked as in a steel mill. He worked washing windows in a hotel. He worked building the McAdoo Tunnel in New York City. Several jobs. He worked paving streets in Ohio. Several jobs he worked at. And then he really got his big break when he went back to New York City. And he began to work for a merchant supply house who supplied pack peddlers working throughout Appalachia. And these pack peddlers traveled around from coal camp to coal camp, selling goods to miners that they didn't want to buy in the company store, couldn't get in the company store.
Yeah.
And so Himmler worked for this company for a while. And then he decided that he could do better as a pack peddler himself. So he decided to give up that job and buy supplies and go through Eastern Kentucky, Southwest Virginia, West Virginia, Pennsylvania as a pack peddler. And he did that. And Himmler came up with a new form of payment that enabled him to make quite a bit of money. That was called COD. He was one of the first people to use collect on delivery. Yeah. And what was happening with most of those peddlers, they would go to, many of them were just crooks. And they would come and sell a mining family goods and make them pay the full cost up front. And then they would never deliver the goods. Well, Himmler did it differently. He told them, okay, you pay me a small deposit, and then I'll send the goods to you, and then you pay the rest of it COD at the post office when the goods arrived. And so Himmler got a real good reputation within the Hungarian community and the immigrant community for being an honest peddler. And so he was able to make his first fortune with selling goods COD to coal miners, immigrant coal miners, mainly in West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Eastern Kentucky. And then he decided he was in, I think, a town of Holden, West Virginia, waiting on a sales call as a peddler And he decided that he was going to start publishing a newspaper for Hungarian coal miners, and he called it Magyar Bandislap, Hungary, or translates into English Hungarian Miner Journal. And that was very successful. It became one of the largest subscription Hungarian language newspapers in the country within just a year or so. And
Wow.
so Himmler became a publisher, and he published a number of other magazines and newspapers, some in English, some in Hungarian. And then he would do several other things. He hired other pack peddlers to work for him and sell goods for him as well. And then in 1942 or 3, is after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, Himmler, he was the age of 55. And he moved his newspaper to Columbus, Ohio after Himlerville collapsed, and then on to Detroit, Michigan. And he decided he needed to thank the United States for the opportunity it gave him to rise to make a fortune based or do well based on his talents, based on his innate ability.
Yeah.
And he said in Hungary you couldn't do that because of the caste system. But in the U.S., if you had talent, you could make it, and he did. And he thought he owed the United States a debt of gratitude, so he decided he was going to enlist in the U.S. Army at the age of 55. And he actually went through basic training at the age of 55. I can't imagine doing that. I couldn't do that.
No.
I mean, I couldn't do it. I couldn't have done it when I was 45, much less 55. And he went through basic training because he could speak several languages, including Hungarian and German. He was assigned to the newly created agency in the Army, the OSS, Office of Strategic Services, which became the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency.
Wow.
And so he basically became, well, not really a spy, I guess, but he rose to the rank of colonel. And I remember he was Jewish. And World War II was the time of the Holocaust in Germany and Europe. Well, one of Himmler's first assignments was directing relief efforts in North Africa during the war, after the Nazis were driven out, and then directing relief efforts in Italy. But then after the war, he was actually sent to Hungary in charge of a group of people to interrogate Nazi war criminals who had sent Jewish people to the death camps. And in fact, Himmler interrogated personally about 30 or 40 of those people himself. The unit he headed interrogated over 300. But some of the very same people that Himmler and his group interrogated were the ones who had sent Himmler's family members in Hungary to the death camps. And most of Himmler's family perished in the Holocaust. But he then interrogated some of those people, and the interrogation purpose was to determine whether they were war criminals and should be remanded to Nuremberg or some other place where the war trials were going on. So Himmler sent a number of these people who'd committed his only family members to the death camps for trial, and some of those were tried and executed.
Wow.
So it's an interesting story. And the interesting thing, too, when he was in Hungary interrogating those criminals, he was in his office one day, and what he described as an elderly woman walked into his office wanting help to find her husband, who had joined the Hungarian army and was missing, hadn't come back after the war. And Himmler recognized the woman right away. It was his long lost love, the teenager. And she had married, and her husband, Himmler was able to find out had been killed in the war. So this woman he'd fallen in love with as a young girl, as a teenager, now came back into his office as an adult. And you just wanted for them to get together, but they didn't.
That was almost too perfect there. Now, so did he have any family, like a wife or kids or anything?
Yeah, when he was never married, but he has some relatives in Michigan. They were the ones who found his autobiography. Now, he gave his publishing business to his nephew, Andrew Fay Fisher, who had lived and worked with him at Himlerville. And so I think Andrew's family is the descendants of Himmler, or his sisters. I think she was his sister's kid. And so he has some nieces and nephews, but himself, no, he has no family.
Okay.
Never married, no direct descendants.
Wow. Well, geez, that is a story, man. I mean, I don't know.
You could make a movie out of it.
Yeah. I mean, getting off the boat and you talk about going, on, making a risk and getting off the boat and everything going bad from the
Mhm.
get-go. And
And
then
making what he made of himself. He was well off until he gave it away. He gave it away to his nephew when he went in the army. But
mhm,
he says he has no regrets. He says in his autobiography that the army life, that was the first time he felt he ever belonged anywhere in his life.
mhm. Yeah. Wow.
Uh, I mean, he really liked that. And now there's some we don't have any evidence to support this,
Mhm,
but there's some uh, talk that he was also working for the CIA during the Suez Crisis in 1956. He was
mhm,
involved in that. I don't know. There's no records of it. The CIA won't release records. And oddly enough, the interrogation record that Himmler that was in the National Archives, where Himmler interrogated the Nazi, or his group interrogated the Nazi uh, war criminals in Hungary, they have disappeared too. They were there at one
mhm,
time and then they're gone.
hmm.
And it's a mystery as to what happened to them. We've tried to find them and we don't know what happened to them.
Yeah, and that's pretty interesting. And so, how long was he? I mean, when he went to Hungary as as an operative, how long was he there? A few years, or
I
just?
would say 3 or 4 years at most.
Mhm, mhm.
It was sometime after he had trouble getting in. The Russians, the Soviet Union controlled Hungary after World War II,
mhm,
but some kind of deal was made to let him in
mhm,
and let him do the interrogation for a
yeah,
while anyway. And then he came back to the U.S. He was actually going to retire, and he bought some land in California. And one of the miners that he was close to at Himlerville had was going to farm the land, and Himmler was going to exist as a freelance writer. And his
mhm,
secretary, she was going to live there too, but the guy that uh, was working the land for Himmler died before Himmler got out of the army, and so Himmler had to sell the land, and he moved to L.A. and he died in I think 1961 of pancreatic cancer, and was cremated. And his remains are in a mausoleum in L.A. now.
wow, wow, from
He was
Hungary to
in there.
Kentucky to LA. Wow, that is
There's
amazing.
more to his story than that. It's just the basics of
Yeah.
what he did. And I mean, he was a hobo for a while. He said the only time he ever visited the Kentucky Derby or attended Kentucky Derby in his life was when he was a hobo. He hoboed a train to the Kentucky Derby.
Wow. Mhm. What so and you said too, so, during World War II, most of his family was, uh, taken
Yeah.
and killed.
Mhm.
Um, so did he have any relatives from Hungary that would be alive or just
Yeah,
distant?
I think he had a brother, maybe a brother and a sister who survived,
Mhm,
and but most of them were not. Now I don't know what happened to his mother or his father. He doesn't really say what happened to them in the autobiography. But I think he mentions going back and his brother was still alive and maybe a sister.
yeah,
He had a
yeah,
pretty large family,
mhm.
and
Wow,
most of them perished.
yeah, wow. Wow,
It's kind of
that
odd,
is
he maybe got some revenge, when he was able to sentence, determine where those Nazis
yeah.
lived or died. I mean, he basically was, he says in the book, people accuse him of. He said he didn't like playing God. He said he felt like he was playing God. He didn't like playing God. He said.
Mhm. Yeah. That
But there's
is
another interesting story too. How he became Catholic. He became Catholic. He was Jewish,
uh-huh.
and he became Catholic because when he came to the United States, he met this young woman who wanted to marry him. He didn't
Mhm.
want to marry her. She tried to trick him into marrying her because he kissed her one time, he said, and she told him, well, now that means in the U.S., and he didn't know enough to know any better, that you've got to marry me. And so he was getting ready for the wedding. And he went and saw a Catholic priest, and the Catholic priest told him, said, look, that woman's lying. You don't have to marry her because you kissed her. And so Himmler became Catholic because of that. He said,
Oh,
oh,
oh, wow.
kind of funny
Well,
story.
gotta do what you
He
gotta
thought,
do, I guess.
well, he thought, he's so grateful for the priest because he wanted to marry that woman. And he was so grateful for the priest that, he thought Catholic was a good religion, so he wanted to become
Mm,
Catholic.
wow,
He said,
wow. Oh, geez, man, that is
But he's
that is
interesting figure.
yeah. So and how I mean, how long is the biographies? I mean, 100, 200 pages or
Yeah, probably 200 some pages, no more than
yeah,
300. It reads like a novel.
yeah.
I mean,
Okay, well
it
that's
reads like a
good.
novel.
Well,
It's
and
really
it sounds like a really good one. He sounds like a very interesting character, like a very outgoing character. I mean, you'd have to be to leave everything to come to America and take that risk.
well. Then give a publishing empire at 55 to go in the army.
Yeah, well, yeah, yeah. I mean,
I mean, that was something else. When you could, I mean, give up. He had a comfortable life. He survived that newspaper survived the Great Depression barely, but it survived. He talks about how bad it was during the Great Depression. He lost subscribers, that sort of thing, but it survived.
mhm,
And then give it up in 1942 or so to after Pearl Harbor to go into the army, and he never got it back. He didn't want it back.
yeah, yeah. Wow.
And of course, some people say he never left the army. He was always a CIA agent. I don't know. There's some talk that he was always a CIA agent.
Yeah.
Now there's a story that he when he left Himlerville, there's a story in Martin County even today that he absconded with a lot of money, and that's why the company went bankrupt. That's not true.
Oh,
That's
okay.
just gossip. But
Yeah.
Himmler says in the autobiography that he actually went to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, to be
Mhm.
treated for oral cancer when he left Himlerville, because he
Mhm.
had oral cancer. He smoked and he had cancer because of it. And he said he had $2 in his pocket when he arrived in Minnesota for treatment for cancer.
Wow. Hmm. Hmm.
That was right after
Wow.
Himlerville.
Yeah. Yeah. And,
And
and
then he
now,
worked
so
for a
he.
railroad company after Himlerville for a while too. In addition to publishing that newspaper, he worked for a railroad company trying to settle immigrants in the Midwest on farmland in the Midwest.
Hmm,
I don't know much about that part of his life, but he did
yeah.
that for a while.
Yeah. Now, so let's see. You said he died in 61,
Yeah, I believe it's 61.
one, and then he was born in 88. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, yeah, 73. That's a,
Yes. Yeah. He
you know,
was.
that's a pretty good life, I guess. I mean, um, definitely, obviously a hard worker, but I mean, would you say, fulfilling the American dream? I mean, in many
Yeah, I
ways.
think he thought so. I mean, I think he thought so. Now he was really. I mean, he comes out in this autobiography. He's anti-communist.
Hmm.
I mean, he's clearly anti-communist. He thinks that communists, and he's part of the. Lived through the Red Scare of the 1950s, and he's very anti-communist. He thinks that communism is a big threat to the U.S. and costing Americans to not go down that path. And he thinks it's as great a threat as fascism was in Nazi Germany
Hmm.
and fascist Italy.
Yeah.
And he's very anti-Nazi, anti-fascist, anti-communist. He thinks that the American system is the only system in the world, the best system in the world.
Mhm. Yeah, well,
And
I mean, you mentioned too when he was, in Hungary, he felt like he couldn't, couldn't do anything, couldn't get anything
yeah,
going,
yeah.
so he came to America to give it a, where I guess opportunity was more, accessible.
Well, he
Um,
talks about, in Hungary in his young years at Aldebar, he talks about, caste system and poor people couldn't rise above their, as we just say in where I come from in the mountains, you couldn't rise above your raisins.
yeah,
He
yeah.
couldn't rise above what he was born at.
Okay, so let's talk about Himmler and his, the honors that he received.
Yeah, Himmler was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor in I believe 2022, maybe 2023. Can't remember exactly, but we Kathy Corbett and I went to Congressman Hal Rogers' office and convinced Congressman Rogers to sponsor a resolution in Congress awarding Himmler the Congressional Medal of Honor for his service to the country in the OSS during World War II and after World War II. So Congressman Rogers agreed and got a resolution through Congress awarding Himmler the Medal of Honor. And this was before the COVID pandemic hit.
Mhm.
And the ceremony was supposed to take place before COVID hit, but it was canceled. And so it was 2022 or 2023 when it was actually awarded to him. And we had family members coming from Michigan of Himmler's to accept the award. And a number of dignitaries were there, and several television stations broadcast the award on their news. In West Virginia, Kentucky, one even in Missouri broadcast it for some reason. I don't know why station Missouri would broadcast it, but somebody sent me a link. I did the oration for the award, and somebody sent me a link to a television news station in Missouri that had it. So how they would do it, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, maybe there was a distant. Maybe there's a distant relative. Maybe
most of the newspapers in West Virginia and Eastern Kentucky and covering to the Lexington Herald Leader. Now we couldn't get the Courier Journal to cover it for some reason. I don't know why they wouldn't cover it, but the Lexington newspaper did. I think the Huntington, West Virginia newspaper covered it, and several others covered this ceremony that in which he was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. So it was quite an honor for him. And considering everything he did, it was deserved, I think.
Yeah. And now you said extended family. What was the connection, or what's his descendants? I guess
I think they come from a sister. He had no children, so no direct descendants from him. But I think his sisters and her. I guess his nieces and nephews would be his descendants.
Yeah.
That's who he left. He left when he went into the OSS. In the military, he left his newspapers publishing empire to a nephew who ran it up until the 1960s. I think 50s. I think 60s when it went out of existence. But I think through his sister's side, or one of his sisters.
Yeah, that's it's a good story. It's a good story about an immigrant coming to Eastern Kentucky and setting up shop and having a lasting impact. So, pretty interesting life, I guess, to sum it all up.
Yeah, and to sacrifice what he did, to give up, what he was making money from, doing well with publishing, to go into the military at the age of 55. That's a remarkable thing to do. I mean, I don't know many people do that.
No. We're going to wrap our discussion up about Martin Himler with Doug Cantrell. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. We're always seeking to find more Kentucky history so we can bring it to you, the viewers, the listeners. We want all the stories and all the events from Kentucky's great history to be told and shared everywhere.